Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm McKenna Jordan. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. And I know we've been doing a lot of these virtual events, but we have a special treat for you tonight. I'm really excited to be joined by one of our favorite authors, Ragnar Jonasson, whose new book, The Girl Who Died, is just out. But we also have a fascinating, fabulous guest interviewer tonight. We're going to be joined by the Ambassador of Iceland to the United States, Bergdis Ellertsdottir. So those of you who watch frequently know I give a little bit of a rundown here at the beginning, and then I'll bring them on in just a few minutes. I want to mention our other events this week. We have tomorrow night, Christie Woodson-Harvey and Karen White. Wednesday, we'll have Jeffrey Deaver. Thursday, I'm pretty excited about this one, just not necessarily about Jake Tapper, which is super cool. We're hosting Jake Tapper, but also because he's going to be joined by Gillian Flynn, and she doesn't do that many of these, so I think that's going to be pretty cool. Rachel Herron and Sarah Shepard will be here on Friday. If you have any questions, there's no such thing as a dumb question, or if it is dumb, I will not put it on the screen. You can put those in the live chat on YouTube or in the comments on Facebook, and we'll get to them in a little bit. I'm also, as soon as I finish this intro, I'm going to put a link in the comments with all the information about The Girl Who Died, again, brand new, as well as the ordering link for some of Ragnar's other books. Those of you who are regular customers know that we hand sell all of his books very frequently. We're all fans, so you can't go wrong with this one. I think my mom has already said that this is going to be in her top 3 of the year. She's just raving and raving about it. So I guess that is enough about that. Let me go ahead and get our stars introduced for this evening. I'm going to start with Ragnar. Good evening.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. I know it's especially late for you, so I appreciate you staying up to do one of these evening events. I know a lot of people watching already know who you are, but I'm going to do your formal introduction here. Ragnar Jonasson is an international #1 best-selling author who has sold over 2 million books in 32 countries worldwide. His books include the Dark Iceland series and the Hulda series. Jonasson was born in Reykjavik, Iceland, where he also works as an investment banker and teaches copyright law at Reykjavik University. He has previously worked on radio and television, including as a TV news reporter for the Icelandic National Broadcasting Service, and since the age of 17 has translated 14 of Agatha Christie's novels. He's here to talk tonight about his brand new standalone novel, which I will hold up again, The Girl Who Died. Again, thank you for joining us. I'm so excited about this talk. It's going to be a little bit different, I think, and it's going to be great. All right, so we also have Bergdis Ellertsdottir. Hello, good evening.
Hello, good evening.
And you're joining us from Washington this evening, right?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. So let me get you introduced as well, and then I will leave and let you two get to talking. So Bergdis Ellertsdottir has served as the Ambassador of Iceland to the United States since September 2019. Prior to that, she was Ambassador to the European Union in Brussels and Permanent Representative of Iceland to the United Nations. During her long career, Bergdis has worked on trade as well as security issues. Between 2007 and 2012, she was Deputy Secretary General of the European Free Trade Association. Bergdis is an avid reader, and apart from literature, her interests include art and the art of cooking. All right, sounds wonderful. I'm going away. You guys have fun, and I'll see you in about 35 or 40 minutes.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, and for inviting me to have this talk tonight with Ragnar. I mean, it's midnight in Iceland, and I think that's very I think it's a good atmospheric thing for a crime debate. To have it at midnight. And we are going to discuss the recently published book. So I also show my copy, The Girl Who Died. But I also maybe want to talk about your work in general, life and the universe, darkness and isolation, whatever comes to mind whilst we speak. It has also been mentioned that you are, of course, a acclaimed writer, and the Times even asked the bold question, is Ragnar the best crime writer in the world? And I think you cannot get a better praise than that. and mentioned was that you have top bestseller lists all over in France, in Germany, the UK, and of course in Iceland. Translated into 20 languages and all of that. I wanted just to mention at the outset that Iceland is known for that we are not that many, we Icelanders, and people do assume, and the myth is that we all know each other. But actually, I had not had the privilege to talk to Ragnar before we talked very briefly on the phone this morning. So I think I'm just excited as all of you to hear more about him and his life and work. So the question that comes to mind first of all is, why do you write? And why do you write crime novels in such dark and remote places? I mean, your titles certainly tell a tale, Snowblind, Blackout, Nightblind, The Darkness, I can go on. So do tell us, where does this darkness come from?
So, I started writing stories when I was just quite young, and it's always been a part of what I do. And when I was in school, I started translating Agatha Christie novels into Icelandic. And alongside all of that, I just read a lot of detective fiction, crime stories, especially old Golden Age books, and it's just always been a part of me. These kinds of puzzles, these mysteries, and then at some point I thought I would try and write my own, and that's been it's more than 10 years since that I made that decision, and I've just I'm keeping and writing one book every year. And I think, if I wasn't writing and if I wasn't publishing these stories, these books, I would still be writing something. It's just a part of who I am in a way. And the translations filled that gap for me for a while, because it's creative and it's interesting and it has something to do with literature and words. So yeah, it's just, I really couldn't imagine not writing.
You mentioned translating Agatha Christie. First of all, were they Agatha Christie novels that had not yet been translated, or did you want to translate them better? And how did the translation of Agatha Christie, if at all, influence your work? And if not hers, or are there any other crime novelists that have influenced the way you influenced your work in some way?
Yeah, these were, I was mostly trying to translate novels that hadn't been done before. And because even to this date, not all of the Christie books have been translated into Icelandic. So I mostly did that. There were a few titles that had appeared in some form or other, but it was sort of my ambition to try and get more titles into Icelandic. And I think it's safe to say that Agatha has influenced me quite a lot. Even though I'm writing my own type of stories, of course, set in Iceland, set in mostly modern times. But I'm still a big fan, and I still reread her books frequently. And she was a fantastic author and a fantastic creator of mysteries and settings. And she had these beautiful plots that really worked well, and often just so original and so surprising in a way, just cleverly done. So I think it's not just me, but I think every mystery author probably learned quite a lot from Agatha Christie. And some people say that she had basically done everything, so there are no new original plots, and to an extent, that is true. She did a lot of firsts. I won't go into the details. I don't want to spoil any of her books, but if you read her best work, I mean, she was often the first to come up with very clever solutions to mysteries. And as I say, I mean, she also made really good use of setting, and she set her books in really interesting places. The Death on the Nile, or the Murder on the Orient Express, or the country house murders in many of her stories. The setting was really a part of the story, a part of the plot. And for me, that is Iceland. And also I try to pick up a little bit on the plotting. I mean, I never sit down and start writing a book unless I know exactly how it will unfold. And I, try to have some sort of a twist at the end.
Okay. Agatha Christie, I mean, I think we have, if people are here tonight, I'm sure they have read a lot of Agatha Christie. I think for many people, it's who you read, especially when you're young. It's kind of your first kind of introduction into this world or this kind of literature. At least I read a lot of her in my younger days. So I mean, I can see what drew you to her, and the setting, the question of setting, because that is very much important in your work. This setting, in these faraway places, dark places. In the latest novel, you can't go any further away from Reykjavik than to this village of Skálar where it takes place. So setting for you is very important, and maybe you can tell us why you are then drawn to these, kind of isolated. People have talked about claustrophobic places, like in the last novel. There's a story behind that, which I think is interesting also for our US viewers, that, it has to do with the US as well and the World War II. So if you could just enlighten us a bit on that, the settings and the links to the US.
Absolutely. I mean, we live in a very interesting country in Iceland, and with fascinating landscape, and we live it's such a huge country, but we only live on the coastline, more or less. So there's a lot of vastness, and a lot of land, a lot of dangerous places, and a lot of beautiful nature. And I think it's, for me, it's almost impossible to write books in Iceland without putting some focus on this, on these locations and the contrasts that we have. We have these long, bright summer nights, and then we have these dark winters, harsh weather, all sorts of weather, and I mean, so I try to find places in Iceland that I find interesting, whether it's like fishing villages, where I set one of my series, or the Highlands, or in this case, it's a place that is called Skálar, and as you mentioned, I mean, it is as far away from Reykjavik as you can get. Literally, if you draw a straight line from Reykjavik just across Iceland to the northeast, you will more or less end up on this in this part of Iceland. And when I started writing this novel, I thought, I had this idea of a teacher who would go away to a small place, a very small place, to teach. In this case, it was just like 2 children. And the original idea was just this, to see how someone would react to this strange environment, and vice versa, how the villagers would react to a stranger, especially if there is something, some secrets hidden there that we don't know about. And I started looking for like places, and I was in particular looking for very small villages, and as I say, in particular, maybe villages that don't exist anymore, so I could work with them a little bit. And I came across this one. It's it's not really well known, and especially because it's so far away that not a lot of people from Reykjavik have actually been there. But it really fit perfectly into what I needed, because it's so far away. It is set in a very sort of dramatic area, and it has a lot of history. And in real life, and now the book is set in the 1980s, and at that time there was no one was living there. But for the purposes of the story, I have imagined that there was still a village there at that time. But in reality, the last people left Skálar in the 1950s, and most of them had left earlier, around the war maybe. And but at its height, it was a village of 100 up to 200 people at most. And I went there to do some research for the book, and it still has quite incredible ruins of these old houses. And there was never any electricity in this place. So it has a lot of old charm about it, and when you read the book, every sort of story from the past, the anecdotes or the references, they are all, I hope, more or less true, because they were based on facts. I did quite a lot of research into this, and so when you read the book, you will get to know a little bit about this place in reality, even though the characters are made up and the plot and the mystery is made up. And you mentioned the U.S., and they had during the war there was a U.S. Military presence there, a radar station being built there, just very close to the village. And it's been fascinating to read about that. I read an interview with an elderly member of the armed forces who came back to visit decades later, and he remembered how terribly cold it had been. They were living in like small barracks, a little bit, a short distance from the village. But there are also these lovely stories of the interaction between the U.S. personnel and the villagers, and it seemed to be quite a friendly. The kids went up there to see films, I think, etc. So it was it was such an incredible contrast, and the Second World War was more or less brought to this faraway place.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think this is something that's very interesting for the U.S. reader, and because it's not so much known, this U.S. military presence in Iceland during the war. And I thought that part of the story with the interaction between the small boys who didn't know any English with these guys, it was very sweet and very kind of believable. It's very much like the stories people tell who were, in these remote places in Iceland when all of a sudden these soldiers came and, kind of changed their lives and the way they looked at life. So I thought that was a very good part of the story, and maybe not so gloomy as the other part. So yeah, I think that could be interesting for the US reader, I'm sure. But in general, you sometimes hear, because you said if you were not writing crime novels, you would be writing something else. But sometimes you hear novelists complaining about crime novels being the only thing that sells these days, and that publishers, they don't want to publish anything unless it's a probable bestseller crime novel. But why do you think people are so drawn to this, to murder and all these horrors? And I read somewhere that someone had said that your books were exactly what you need in the pandemic isolations we've been having. What do you think draws people to this, to this dark side of the humankind, so to speak?
I think, a part of it is just or at least for me, it's just the puzzle. It's just the in a way, escaping into a different world and trying to solve a puzzle that the author has created for you. I mean, for me, that is of such interest. But on top of that, I mean, crime novels are, of course, just novels as well, and they show you a reality, and they shed a light on reality, on society in a way. And in the case of Icelandic crime novels, I hope they in a way can show the readers a little bit about life in Iceland, and I think all good novels are more or less driven by characters. And I mean, if you don't engage with the characters, the lead character, or more or less just the whole gallery of characters in a story, you might not want to read it to the end, and you will definitely not want to pick up another book in the same series, because for me it's so much about the people on the page, bringing them to life and telling their stories. So I think there are a lot of elements, and when they all combine, I mean, they make a good crime story. And on top of that, I think many good novels are probably in a way crime novels. I think this labeling isn't necessarily true. I mean, it's not. It's often more done by the publishers rather than the authors or the readers. But if you think of a good novel that you read, which may not have been classified as a crime novel, I'm sure in most cases there was a crime in it somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Because crime and sort of strong conflicts like that really drive a story and keep the reader engaged. So it's the crime element is maybe sometimes just a trick to keep you reading about the people in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very good take on it, and I absolutely agree with you, because crime novels, I mean, they tell all sorts of stories, not just sometimes even the plot is not the most important thing, so I think that's a very good way of explaining it, that in a way most stories are crime stories, or you're trying to solve or understand the characters. And you talked about engaging with the main characters, and I can tell you, first of all, this book ruined my weekend, but secondly, because I couldn't put it down, but secondly, I also had to drink some red wine. Well, so I fully kind of merged into this person, the teacher. So two complaints from me. But I wondered, because I actually have to admit that I have not read it in Icelandic, so I only read it in English. So, and I noticed that in some places there is an explanation of things like food or some traditions or names, and I just wondered, is that an addition in the translation, or is it in the original? I mean, it would be something that the Icelandic reader would know, but for example, a US reader would need to have explained it.
Yeah, usually there's an addition. I mean, usually I have had fantastic translators into English, and we have an understanding in terms of the translator can suggest places where they think that I should add some sort of detail or clarifications, and we usually go through that in great detail before the book is published in English. And so yeah, we to clarify some things that would be obvious to the Icelandic reader, and I think that is hopefully helpful. And so in that way, these versions differ slightly from the original.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very subtle. It's not that I just noticed, and I just wondered if it was the case with the Icelandic version as well. I mean, it wouldn't have harmed even in the Icelandic version, but it was just something I was interested in. You have just, because we are talking about Iceland and Icelandic literature, and maybe some of the people here tonight might want to know more about kind of the role of literature in Iceland, and which I think plays a bigger role than in many other societies. I mean, I think most people have, like, not most, a lot of people have, you know, some pages hidden in a drawer somewhere, hoping that would be published someday. And I think I read somewhere that 1 in every 10 Icelanders at one point in their life do publish something. So it's a very inherent part of our culture. So, I mean, can you just elaborate a little bit on that, the role of literature in Iceland?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the literature is the strongest heritage we have in the Icelandic culture, because I mean, 100 years ago and beyond, I mean, Icelanders were, you know, living in turf houses and just, you know, trying to get by. It's a harsh, difficult land to live in, and it's just in the, you know, in the last century or so that it has been that is sort of changed from a farmers, fishermen societies to you know, more urban areas, and but the one thing, so we don't have a lot of old art in terms of, you know, from the Middle Ages. We don't have a lot of architecture or paintings or anything of that sort from that time, but we have the old manuscripts. We have the old Icelandic sagas that were written, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and are still preserved as our most, you know, valuable assets in the Icelandic culture. And I think that has a lot to do with why literature is so important to us, and why we buy so many books, why we read a lot, why we talk about books, and why so many of us want to write books or have done so. I mean, we also have a Nobel Prize winner in literature in Halldór Laxness from the middle of the last century, which is incredible for such a small country. So, I mean, these are achievements that we are proud of, and I think, yeah, I think that is, in a way, the biggest reason why we have this strong literature connection.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I think, as you mentioned, the Icelandic sagas and just literature and the language, it's our identity. It's not, we do not have, you know, huge cathedrals or artwork, as you mentioned. So it's very much, you know, what we refer to as our national identity, I would say. So I fully agree with that. And also that, I mean, hopefully we will keep on writing. I mean, there are some indications that at least small boys, they should read more. And I think there are some ways that they are being kind of encouraged to do so. But still, in comparison, I think reading is much more a part of our everyday life. And you know, around Christmas, when most of the books get published, you know, that's all we think about. The whole of December, we think about decorations and books, and you know, who is on the bestseller list, who is, you know, we read the critics of every book, and you know, everyone is talking about books all the time. So I think that's special, and it's a very, I love that part of the year with all the books coming out. So it's a very, I think, a special tradition that we have. And maybe, I mean, if we talk a little bit about why, you know, we have felt a lot of interest in the US, interest for Iceland, and also, you know, the interest that readers have shown your work here. And I was just wondering, you have touched a little bit about that, but I mean, why would US or Americans be so interested in Iceland? Do you think it somehow reinforces their idea of the cold north, of the kind of tough people, hard to get to know, kind of somehow, you know, that's the idea that they have of Iceland, and that is somehow, you know, underlined in your books? I mean, it's sort of their kind of sort of idea of what Iceland is, and this has also been in some of the TV series and films that have come out of Iceland and been popular here?
I think, yeah, partly that is true. And the characters in the Icelandic crime novels are, of course, maybe not a perfect reflection of the Icelandic population, because these stories tend to focus on the more, darker deeds and the dark side of human nature. But I think it's, the reason may also be the exact opposite, that the fact that I think most Americans would probably associate Iceland with zero crime, with peaceful community, which it really is. I mean, it is one of the, it's always ranked number 1 or 2 in the world, on the peace index. So I think that might also be a reason why foreign readers are drawn to crime novels set in this, such this strange place that Iceland is. It's a peaceful country, and so people might, wonder how can a crime novel work, and it might be that interest. And in some cases also, I mean, people would associate the Nordic countries in general with, peace and prosperity, and there's maybe a little bit in every reader that, is happy to see that these places aren't really as perfect as you think they are. They have their problems, of course. They have their, have their crime. But I mean, we had this. We had a lot of problem just creating the art of the crime novel in Iceland in recent times. I mean, you can probably say that the Icelandic sagas from the Middle Ages were crime novels in a way. They were quite, they were strong thrillers, literature thrillers with killings and vengeance and all of that. But the modern crime novel in Iceland was just, re-emerged in the late 1990s. I mean, we had no golden age of crime fiction like the Americans or the British did, and almost no crime novels in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I mean, just one and one here, one there. But it wasn't until almost at the turn of the century that it became acceptable to write crime fiction in Iceland. And I think the main reason for that was that this is a small place with low crime rates, low murder rates. So we had to, readers sort of had to accept that this was possible. And then we are now, hopefully in our own golden age of, Icelandic crime writing with a lot of crime novels published every year and sold abroad.
No, absolutely. I mean, as you say, it's a recent phenomenon in Iceland, and so I have 2 questions. One, I think this acceptance that that it's really that you can believe that something happens in a small town. You need somehow to make it believable that in a peaceful fisheries village somewhere in the north that people can be killed, So I think that's a very valid point. But I also want to, in The Girl Who Died, there is like a side story, understory, whatever, which for me reminded me of maybe the crime in Iceland, at least in the 80s, which kind of shook the population, and people, someone was killed and they were never found and all of that stuff. So is this a reference to that, or is it just a coincidence?
Yeah, that is quite right. I mean, it's most certainly a reference to this. This is the this is the most famous unsolved mystery in Iceland, the disappearance of 2 men in the 1970s, and their bodies have never been found. No one really knows what happened. There were some individuals that were actually, found guilty of murdering them without any bodies and without any real evidence. It was more or less based on confessions that were later withdrawn, and they were later acquitted just recently. by the Supreme Court. Some of them had actually passed away in the meantime, but which leaves the crime again unsolved all these decades later, and it's just, you know, no one knows, or, you know, people basically have no idea what happened, where these men are, if there were two of them, and if their disappearances were connected or not, we don't know. But it's such an interesting mystery that it's been a part of the Icelandic nation for years and years. And for this particular story, I was certainly inspired by that. And for me, I made up, in a way, without going into too much detail, my own solution, even though it's just pure fabrication, it's based on nothing. But it's my own solution of a disappearance around that at the same time. And but it is most certainly a reference to this case, and sort of because it's an interesting case, and it's something that's has stayed with Iceland for so many years. I mean, it's in a way our biggest, locally our best known mystery.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. No. I just wanted. I see that we are, maybe getting closer to the time that we'll ask the audience to ask some questions. But I just wanted to. I mean, people often talk about the Icelanders being, believing in elves and a lot of mystery stories and stuff like that. And because of the book, I just wanted to ask you one final question. Do you believe in ghosts?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't think, not really, to be honest, but I think they make for good reading, ghost stories, and there's small minor ghost story in this book. Whether it's a ghost story or not, it's sort of up to the reader to decide, but it's a little bit of added drama to the story. And that was actually inspired also by was a friend of mine who showed me when I was sort of working on this novel, or at least I had the idea was there of this girl who moved from Reykjavik to this faraway town. And when I was thinking of that, he showed me a photo of a house in Reykjavik from the 1920s, and it was an old faded photo, and there was a few people standing in front of the house, and he said, look at this girl in the middle, she's actually a ghost, and she's haunted this house, and I've heard of people who lived there and moved away, etc. And I thought that's an interesting story, and I basically took that house and that photo and, in my mind, and I transferred it to the small village of Skálar. And I thought, what if there's a story like that, surrounding the house that this main protagonist in the story moves into, and she finds out little by little that something horrible happened there before. But it's, it's not, in a way, it's not a ghost story, it's a mystery, and everything in the story is firmly set in reality, and the mystery is most certainly a real life mystery. But I thought, if we give this house a little bit of a backstory and give the reader a little bit of doubt, I think it might make the book even a little bit more fun to read.
It certainly did. And I mean, ghosts are a part of not only our culture, but it's something that it's fun to play with, because there are so many nuances, and who sees what. At least when I was growing up, when you heard women talking over the cups of coffee in the kitchen, they were always telling stories of someone who had seen something, or someone, so it's kind of very much part of the culture, I think. And also, I just wanted to add that the main character has a reason for leaving Reykjavik and going to this remote place to teach. But this used to be very much part of the culture as well in Iceland. I mean, I remember a lot of my colleagues, when we finished college, I mean, they went to places all over the country to be teachers. I mean, that was very much the thing you did sometimes if you didn't know exactly, what you wanted to do with your life. You would go 1 year to Siglufjörður and teach, and so it's also kind of was a very much a part of life, especially in the 80s, I think. So I think that's also makes the story very believable.
Yeah, and I actually also enjoyed writing about a teacher, because so many crime novels are obviously have policemen, policewomen as the main driving force of the story, but I thought it might be much more interesting to write about someone who is doing something totally different and still gets caught in the middle of a mystery. And for me, a young teacher from Reykjavik trying to find her way out of the mystery of this village made it even more fun for me, at least.
No, it did. It's really a good character. So over to you, McKenna.
Sure. I will just take this moment real quick to remind everyone that if you're interested in more information about the book or to order, there's a link in the comments or in the live chat on YouTube. We've got some questions. If you want to pop in some more questions, we should be able to get to them, but now's the time to do it if something's come up. Okay, I think that actually both of you can answer this. What is most misunderstood about Iceland? And how about we start with Bergdis for a second?
Oh my God. It's a very good question. I wish I had the answer to it. Most misunderstood. 10, 20 years ago, there would be much, to say, but today's people, Iceland is all over the place in the media, and, I'm not sure what it is.
Ragnar, you got an answer?
Yeah, probably that it's probably the weather, I would say, in some ways. I think people tend to think that Iceland is a little
colder.
I mean, it's not Texas, that's for sure. But it is, especially in wintertime, it is a pretty mild place to live. And in the summers, I mean, it doesn't get really warm. But we have lovely summers here, and it's been sunny here for like 2 weeks in a row now. Every day, it's been quite fantastic. But I think people would probably assume that they would go to Iceland in wintertime, and it would be freezing cold. But actually, you would find in the middle of winter, most places in Europe or Scandinavia or even in America will be colder than Iceland.
Yeah, maybe in Texas,
Maybe well, wait.
Exactly.
Last year, I'm sure we had moments of that.
Exactly. But I also wanted to maybe reiterate what I said in the beginning. I think there's a myth that we are so few that we all know each other, and people make jokes about, I'm sure you know him and her. And you're like, no, I've never heard of the guy, or they phone and say, I'm looking for a woman named Solveig. And I'm like, okay, anything more? No, I met her 40 years ago when I was in Iceland, and I would like to look her up. And I'm like, okay, I need some more information about her. So I think that's also,
Yeah. Okay, so about the books, have you thought about writing a mystery based on the banking world?
Yeah, no.
Short and sweet.
I can foresee so many murders being possible there,
No, it's not. It's not creative enough, I think. I want something more magical.
Okay. So violence must be an exception in Iceland. You've already talked about the low crime rate. Where do you draw on for the incidents in your books?
Yeah, I mean, there is very low crime rate. I mean, some years there is actually not a single murder committed in Iceland. So, and you really want to make the stories believable, and it is often a challenge. But I get my inspiration from anywhere. I mean, from reading articles or reading the news, whether it's in Iceland or elsewhere, and you get these small ideas, small words or events, and you turn them on their head, and suddenly it's a plot. But I think, I mean, in some of these stories, I go back in time, look at old cases, and that helps because, if you have a larger time span to work with, if you have the whole century and you can go back and find something that happened like 30 years ago rather than doing a whole series based on, one murder every year in Iceland, which really might not even happen, then you can, I think you can work around it that way. But it takes a bit of creativity, I think, to find crime in Iceland.
Okay, we have an oddly specific question here. I'm going to go ahead and ask it, even though I think we could look it up. What's the best order to read the Ari Thor books?
Yeah, so I would say in the order that they were written. They were actually published slightly out of order in the UK and the US, which is fine. But I mean, as they are all out now, I would read them in the following order: Snowblind, and Blackout, and Rupture, Whiteout, Nightblind, and Winterkill.
Okay, so I did not type that in the comments, so you guys can just rewind if you missed it and you need it repeated. Just hit rewind once this video is over. Let's see. Okay. Hello from Los Angeles. Ragnar, what do you not like reading or writing in mystery literature, Icelandic or otherwise?
I mean, I don't particularly like to write about police procedures, to be honest. And hence I probably don't read a lot of those types of books either. Not necessarily, although some of them are fantastically well done, and there are some of my favorite authors like P.D. James, who wrote about Dalglish in the police force, and that is in a way a police procedural. But I often think that you get stuck with policemen because you have to write a crime novel. As I said, I mean, I loved writing about this teacher, and the problem is, and that I want to go even in some of these books like this one. I go a little bit back in time, and I set the book in the 1980s. Because another thing I don't really like writing about is the all this modern technology that sometimes feels a little like cheating for the detective. Because I want the clues to be there. I sort of want a more golden age feel to the stories, and more clues, more psychological interest. Yeah, I really don't want you to find out who the killer is because of the DNA that someone was able to match. I mean, it doesn't really interest me a lot. So sometimes I just wish I could go back to the 1930s and write about this, Lord Peter Wimsey or Hercule Poirot, or these gentleman detectives that just happened to be there every time a crime was committed, and didn't have to worry about mobile phones or DNA. But I realized that it's impractical and would not probably work so well these days. But so again, yeah, you have to make up your own new characters and try to keep things interesting.
That's a good answer. All right. If the sagas are medieval crime novels, is it possible to think that the saga age was actually more peaceful than we think? Maybe the saga writers were as clever as you and Yrsa and Arnaldur.
Yeah, I think the saga writers were actually super clever, to be honest. These were fantastic These are fantastic stories, and it's an interesting point. I think the general view is that these were, to a large extent, inspired by the Viking Age, and I think it's sometimes hard to distinguish between fact and fiction in these stories, because whether they were being created as works of literature or if they were in a way a chronology of things that had happened, it's maybe hard to say at this time. But I think the Viking Age in Iceland was actually pretty violent, and we live in more peaceful times now. But maybe the ambassador has some thoughts on that.
No, I mean, I think it's a very interesting point. I mean, like we have seen now, I mean, the Vikings were not just traveling the world and killing people. I mean, they were traders. And so I mean, it might have been peaceful for some people and less peaceful for the others. I saw an interview the other day with a psychologist who has been kind of psychoanalyzing kind of the main heroes of the sagas, household names in Iceland, and so, which was very interesting on looking at the behaviors in the sagas, no matter if they were real or not. So I think for the main families, the chieftains and their kind of followers, it was definitely horrific. But maybe for the ordinary people, it was just miserable life as any other day. Just trying to get by and not being mixed up with the quarrels and the issues that the chieftains had. So it might be, both could be true. But the thing is that in Iceland, at least when I was growing up, people were quarreling all the time if these were real persons or fiction. I mean, that was really what kind of divided people, if they believed that these people actually lived in Iceland or not. So it was a very heated debate in most the family reunions.
But it's a fantastic question, I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to look into it.
Okay, this one also, I'm sure both of you can answer. I'll be traveling to Iceland next month. What's one not to miss place or thing mentioned in your books? But we can go beyond the books too. How about you start, Ragnar?
I mean, obviously, if we go away from the books, I mean, you have to go and see the volcano that is actually erupting. I can, if I go up next floor, I can see it outside of my window. Basically, it's so close to Reykjavik, and that is like a once in a lifetime experience. And so I think that would be the obvious, not to miss choice, to go there by helicopter or by foot, and just see this incredible event. Just it's almost next to the airport and the capital.
Okay, how about you, Bergdis?
Yeah, I agree, of course, that this is something not to be missed. But I would also, if people are admirers of Ragnar's, they should definitely go to Siglufjörður, which is a beautiful town in the north of Iceland where a lot of the books take place. And one of my favorite places to go to, and I have I don't have any relatives or anything. I just love the town.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with that. It's I spent a lot of time there, and wrote 6 books that were set there, and it's one of my all-time favorite places to stay in, and this picture-perfect village in the north. Really, really wonderful place to visit.
Okay, great. We have another question here. Iceland is culturally Scandinavian. Is there strong interest in authors from there, like Nesbo, Adler Olsen, etc.? So I think basically, does Scandinavian crime fiction do well in Iceland?
Yeah, it does really well, and Nesbo is really widely read and usually tops the bestseller lists whenever a new book of his is published here. And I think there is, a few reasons for that. One is of course even though Iceland is strictly not Scandinavia, but it's Nordic. There is a strong link between Iceland and the other Nordic countries, and both historical and cultural, and so we feel that we are reading stories that could be about our own family, or in a way, even though it's a slightly different country. And the other reason is that these books do really well in translation in Iceland, these Scandinavian crime stories, because Icelanders have, to a large extent, lost their grasp on the Nordic languages. I mean, 100 years ago, like when my grandfather was young, he would read and speak Danish fluently. The younger generation in Iceland now, they would speak English fluently, and the Scandinavian languages not so well. So it's been a good market to translate Scandinavian crime fiction into Icelandic, because most readers would, I think, would read them in Icelandic translation. But for British American authors, they have a hard time finding publishers in Iceland now, because people just pick them up in the original language. So they find their readers, but they don't get translated.
Interesting. We have a question kind of related to that. You write in Icelandic but speak English fluently. Do you debate with your translator on specific wording or meaning?
Yeah, I have lovely debates with my translators. I've had two translators in English, and both been fantastic, and we have a very good working relationship, and this is the only edition outside of the Icelandic one that I read word by word, and I have a very strong opinion on phrases and etc. But in all those cases, they've been in fantastic hands, and the Vicky, who translated The Girl Who Died, is a world-class translator. So I always feel I'm in very good hands, although I have some opinions here and there.
Great. I think that covers the questions, and it's about time to wrap up anyway. I do want to give special thanks to our guest interviewer tonight. It's not often that we have such a luminary joining us for the evening, so it's been a real treat to have the Ambassador of Iceland to the U.S. here this evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It was great, and you did a wonderful interview, and I couldn't be happier with how it went. I hope you had a good time.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And now I feel like I can at least maybe nod to Ragnar when I see him in Reykjavik.
Absolutely. And Ragnar, as always, nice to chat with you. You're always welcome at Murder by the Book in Houston. Hopefully the next one, we'll see you. I think we talked earlier that it would be this one, but we didn't make it.
my first trip to the US when things open up will be to Texas. So I'll come visit.
I'll hold you to that. So, as I said, it's been a lovely evening. Thanks to everyone watching, and I'm going to sign us all off now. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.